Well, Finding Mercy is a personal documentary. It's based on the fact that I grew up in Zimbabwe. I was born not long before Mugabe became the leader of Zimbabwe. So I very much grew up through the Mugabe era, as did a lot of my peers. For a long time I was trying to find a friend of mine who I grew up very closely with in Zimbabwe. I couldn't find her through the internet, through Facebook, through any of the usual means that my other friends and I have kept in contact. We lost touch some time ago, and we were very close as children, and so in my search to find her, I eventually decided to make a documentary about it, because on the other side of things I was wanting to explore the situation in Zimbabwe. I think we get a very small amount of it on the mainstream media. We tend to hear a lot about white farmers, but I was aware that I wanted to tell a lot of the other side of the story, and at the same time I'd been searching for this friend who I grew up with. So in deciding to film that, I wanted to show a little bit of my personal journey, because I decided that that was in a way representative of the situation in Zimbabwe. Here's me, a white girl. I've been able to leave, set up a new life in Zimbabwe. Mercy, my friend who I left behind, black Zimbabwean of the Matabele tribe, and has had very different story to tell. So in telling my story and her story, I was hoping to communicate a little bit more of what else has been happening in Zimbabwe. This film came about basically because I had been searching just on my own without filming it for a number of years, and I hadn't seen any sign of Mercy. I hadn't found any trace of her, so I became increasingly worried about her. And like I said, at the same time I was wanting to communicate about the Zimbabwe situation, and so I put those two together and decided to film it, and that's how it came about. But what made it a reality is that I actually took it to Documentary Edge forum, and I took it to the speed dating pitch session, and I was taking it around producers and funders at that point, one of whom was Leanne Pooley, and she said, I really want to help you tell the story, I really want to come on board as your producer. And I said, well, that's really nice. And later in the evening she approached me again. She said, no, I really want to, be part of this. So that was fantastic. For me, telling a personal story in particular, it was really great to have an experienced producer come on board, and from there we took it to TVNZ, and TVNZ took it on with NZ On Air, and we were able to make it a reality. The film, in terms of official time, the film took about 4 years. Unofficially, I'd been doing a lot of research before that, just in my own search for Mercy before the film idea came about. But once the film idea started, to the film idea finishing was about 4 years. So it was a long-term project, and there was a lot of, it was a bit of a roller coaster ride. There were a lot of highs, there were a lot of lows, there was a lot of waiting time, there was a lot of time where we didn't know, how it was going to continue, but we got there in the end. There were definitely some lows along the way. The thing with Zimbabwe is that the danger is not obvious. Certain countries in the world you go to, it's very obvious where the danger is coming from. There's people pointing guns at you, there's clearly a war situation. Zimbabwe is a very dangerous country at the moment under the current political regime. However, that danger is not apparent, which makes it very difficult to know how to film. We were filming undercover, but a lot of the time we didn't know who we can trust. We didn't know if we could trust someone, we didn't know if we could not trust someone, so we had to be very careful with who we gave information to, very careful when our camera was out, very careful how we were behaving in certain situations. So my cameraman and I had a story that we were boyfriend and girlfriend, we were travelling, I was taking him home to Zimbabwe to show him around, and that cover story worked for us most of the time, but there were certainly times where we got questioned quite intensely by someone who seemed to, just casually straight up and strike up a conversation, but the questions became more and more intense. And unfortunately in Zimbabwe that's exactly what you have to watch out for. The CIO, security service, is very well resourced there, and they infamously do keep an eye out for foreign journalists filming undercover. So we did have to keep our wits about us, and there were a number of situations we got into where it was very delicate, and we had to just keep seeming very relaxed and talking our way out of that, and pulling out the the tourist guides and and keeping up the cover story there. The highs, I mean, there were many highs, some of which I can't obviously talk about before people have seen the film, but certainly there were highs along the way. Catching up with other old friends, some of which was unexpected. I met up with another old friend, Aubrey and decent guy, who used to be in our class at school as well, and developed a really nice current friendship with him. He was another person who I'd been out of contact with for a long time, and found him in Johannesburg. And together with he and his wife, Heather Mangrewa, we were able to talk about those times in Zimbabwe and really compare notes, because he'd been living there, his parents still lived there, and compare notes with his experience, my experience, Mercy's experience, and that really helped me on the trail to find Mercy as well. So that was definitely a highlight. This is my first feature film, yes, so it's a little bit of a baptism by fire in terms of a way to start, with the feature taking on a personal project, which was, obviously there were a lot of, personal emotions to deal with along the way, and I had to keep separating that off from the filmmaking. So there were a lot of challenges, but ultimately I'm pleased that I did it. Well, I'll certainly stay connected to Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe will always be important to me. This is obviously one of so many stories in Zimbabwe, so if I can do more to publicise the issues, the real issues that are happening in Zimbabwe, then I'll certainly keep trying to do that. In the meantime, at the moment, I'm working for Attitude Pictures, making documentaries for TVNZ. I'm really enjoying that, really enjoying the work that's disability focused, and there's some fantastic stories there. And yeah, just always keep making documentaries. There are a couple of pet projects in the pipeline, but we'll wait and see whether they get off the ground soon. So. IDFA, the International Documentary Festival in Amsterdam, was an amazing experience. It was incredible to be able to travel to IDFA with the film. It was amazing that Finding Mercy was able to screen at IDFA. That was huge for the film, and a fantastic platform for Zimbabwe issues as well. It was really well attended. IDFA is a challenging festival. It's a great festival. It's solely focused on documentaries, which is quite a wonderful thing about IDFA. There's not the dramas and the features and the actors that can make other festivals really exciting and great, but it's really nice to just be able to focus on documentaries like we can at Documentary Edge as well, and just really get into the craft of documentary making, look at the different forms of it that are being made. So IDFA was an incredible experience, and I'm very privileged to have been able to go there. I met some Zimbabweans there who came to the film, including a Zimbabwean journalist who's working undercover for the independent media in Zimbabwe, and that was a really interesting experience. Talking to him, we had a really good conversation, and he's taken some information about the film back to Zimbabwe under the radar, so it'll be interesting to see what comes of that as well. Keep going. I think there's lots of times when you're making documentary that it is tempting to give up. It's a hard road. Documentary is often the poor cousin in terms of funding. There's not a lot of glamour involved, but in the end, you're doing it for the art, you're doing it for the craft, and you're doing it for the message a lot of the time with documentary. You've got something that you want to communicate, and it is all worth it in the end, but don't give up, keep going. It is a hard road, but we get there. I was listening to an interview with the guy who made Searching for Sugarman recently, and he certainly went through a lot of trials and had to do so much himself, and create inventive ways to get around problems, as we all do with documentary. But that's what makes it hard, but it's also what makes it great. There are so many people that I need to thank. In the process of Finding Mercy, obviously it took place over 4 years. There are a huge number of people to thank, from a family who supported it, given that it was a personal story. That was quite a big deal. Documentary Edge, obviously, for kickstarting the reality of the film. TVNZ, NZ On Air, Leanne Cooley, the crew, all of the crew who worked on it, and there were quite a number of them. And of course, you know, everyone in Zimbabwe who put themselves at risk in some situations to help us, these are people I know well, and we researched it as carefully as possible. We minimise the risk to everybody where possible, but you know, doing anything like this in Zimbabwe or even being associated with it, you know, can be a risk. So there's just countless number of people that I need to thank for this project. Documentaries never, you know, exist on their own. You do so much of it yourself, but you're requiring, you know, a community and everyone who's involved in it subject-wise to come on board and be a part of that. So I'm very grateful for all the support. The biggest challenge facing documentary filmmakers in New Zealand, or actually globally, is always funding. I think in order to get funding for documentary, there are a lot of hills to climb. We're very lucky in New Zealand at the moment. We've just had a new fund announced, which is brilliant. But you know, globally with the financial situation at the moment, getting additional funding for anything, private funding, any kind of funding is difficult, and that I think is always a challenge facing documentary makers. I think we face a challenge with audiences. I think that TV in particular is in a transitional phase at the moment. It's shifting. There's a lot of focus on reality television, which sometimes has a documentary element but sometimes doesn't. And in order to get what we think of as traditional documentary, you know, funded in that current climate can be very difficult. But I think it is worth persevering because there is an audience for it out there. There is a market for it out there. And you know, the more that we can show that and get our films out there, then the better.
Great. Thank you.